Hey, what's up? This is gonna be my second video book review. I'm choosing this book because Big B owes me left a comment on my previous video saying, I really hope you do a review of Antifragile, so let's do it. So I bought this book when it came out in 2012, so it's pretty, you can see my cats have gotten to it, and the cool thing about this is that I've read it multiple times, and so I think once when I read it, I wrote in blue, and another time when I read it, I wrote in red. So I have conversations with myself in the margins, which is pretty fun. I look forward to reading it again. So not just so I can read the book, but so I can also read my thoughts and my arguments with myself. Pretty exciting. I'm gonna read it again at some point. I'm probably gonna use green pen. Anyway, I have some notes, bullet points really, from when I last took notes on this book. And I'm just gonna riff off of the ideas in that. Actually, even before that, I guess let's just talk like generally about the book. So the book came out in 2012 in November. I bought it when it came out. I was actually volunteering to do a sleep study where I wasn't supposed to sleep for 24 hours, and I was being observed. And there's like every hour you do a reaction test to see how sleep deprivation affects your cognition. And that's a test that I volunteered to do. I think they paid me about $100, and so you get to do whatever you want between the tests, but you can't sleep. So I spent the whole 24 hours reading Antifragile, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good book, and I think it doesn't seem very fashionable to talk about Taleb anymore. I think it was fashionable for a while, and then now it's like if you're cool, you talk about maybe like people talk about its limitations. Maybe I don't know. I haven't been following the cool crowd, but it's a book that I think introduced a way of thinking to me that I found very, I would say it reintroduced in a way. I think it reintroduced me a little bit to some of my intuitions, and I remember while I was reading Black Swan, I remember thinking, oh my god, I'm so stupid. I was writing in the margins, wow, I'm so stupid. Why do I believe all these things that, people have told me, right? And I think, and so, right now, I am currently happily without an employer. So I'm doing freelance marketing, and I have a Patreon, and I kind of have like a whole bunch of different things going on, different gigs. I sell t-shirts. And so I don't have any one single source of income. And so if any one of my sources of income like vanished, it would suck, but I wouldn't panic. Like I would figure out what else to do. And I think it's not an exaggeration to say that Antifragile and Black Swan were, influences in helping me think that way, in thinking about how to be anti-fragile. I would like to think of myself as someone who is somewhat anti-fragile. Like I can, gain from disorder, right? Basically, which is the idea in the book, which is that most things in the world around us, in the civilized world, very over optimized, effectively. And you go to school, and so he has this great phrase that he uses called the Harvard Soviet complex, which I think is a very evocative image. Just there are phrases like lecturing birds how to fly, this idea of like going to business school to study business, but it's really business administration rather than how you start a business. You learn more about how to start a business. I learned more about how to run a business playing in a band and trying to sell tickets to people and getting them to show up. Like there are all these kind of I think he uses examples of like taxi drivers, prostitutes even potentially, and just people who kind of live in the marketplace directly, and they have to interact with other people, like buying and selling stuff in a very direct way. There's something about that makes you, it doesn't make you fragile. So what makes you fragile is, if you've developed a very, very specific skill set that is in demand by a very specific kind of organization, and there's a chance that, and then in that situation, if your job gets replaced, then unless you have alternative skill sets, which you probably wouldn't, or lots of people don't, because they're optimized for that based on school and whatever else people think. So basically Taleb makes the case that financial systems were fragile, and people didn't want to admit or accept that they were fragile because nothing catastrophic has happened in the past X years, 20 years, 30 years. So if something hasn't happened before, then it's never happened. It will never happen, right? Or like the biggest thing you've seen is the biggest thing that exists. Like there's nothing bigger than anything you've ever seen. Like these are kind of the ideas that people have when they've been educated by fragile systems. Like he talks about soccer moms who overschedule, and he talks about just I think in general this sense of trying to over predict the future. So the world is complex. One of the opening lines that he says is I want to live happily in a world that we don't understand. And so there's this idea of the pretense of knowledge that people confidently walk into the world acting or pretending as if they understand it, and what they think they understand or it's just the way things have been so far most of the time. And order can collapse, right? Everything that you think can be wrong, and you have to be anti-fragile, or to just not be fragile. So I'm not entirely sure if that guarantees that you'll be anti-fragile, but like again, so I guess to not be fragile you have to be prepared for such circumstances. One of the lines in the book is don't be a turkey, right? So a turkey, the story of the turkey is you live on a farm, the farmer loves you, every day the farmer is feeding you, and every day your relationship with the farmer gets better and better, and you just keep getting fatter and fatter, and you're like, oh wow, the farmer loves me, I'm a happy turkey, until the farmer cuts your head off because it's Thanksgiving, right? And Taylor makes the case that most of us are turkeys because we're born in systems that seem to be feeding us and seem to be taking care of us. And I mean, there may not be a single dramatic event like Thanksgiving where someone's going to come and lop your head off, but basically people pick up pennies in front of a steamroller, right? Like you just kind of assume that the way things are the way things are going to be moving forward. And yeah, so you don't want to be a turkey, and you don't want to. So you can't. So in the real world, you can't really know whether or not you're a turkey. You can't really know whether or not there's going to be a day where someone's going to cut your head off. But what you may want to do is you may want to try and design an environment where nobody has the tools to cut your head off potentially, right? Like so you don't want to set yourself up to be fragile. You don't want to have like the Death Star has this one exhaust port where if you shoot it the whole thing explodes. So you don't want to have that. You don't want to have one critical point of failure. You don't want you don't want to define your meaning by your job such that if you lose your job suddenly your life is meaningless. Like you want to have distributed multiple sources of meaning, multiple sources of income if you can, be in multiple social networks, read different kinds of books, just generally diversify things. Don't depend too much on any one thing. Be willing to fail at many levels, and kind of live and survive failures. Never bet what you can't afford to lose, right? Never assume that things are gonna continue being the way they are. So you can't predict when bad shit is gonna happen, but with certainty that good shit cannot happen inevitably. So bad shit is gonna happen at some point, right? At some point in our lives, something terrible is gonna happen, and so you should be aware of that. I don't know if you should necessarily over prepare for it, again, because when you're trying to over prepare, you're preparing based on your assumptions about what the situation is going to be like. And if the situation changes from what you were preparing for, there is a chance that your preparation might end up being useless, right? So one way I think about this is, I don't know if there's much point kind of over preparing for like an apocalypse scenario where you stock up a massive pile of food and whatnot. Because imagine if that happens and then you now have the biggest pile of food, but nobody likes you, let's say, or like your friendships with people are kind of weak, so much so that now you're a target, right? Someone's gonna kill you and take your food, which is so I think the way to be anti-fragile in the world is to have a very diverse group of friends who care about you, and so that if you are in dire straits or whatever, you can count on people. Yeah, so what else? What other phrases do I have? He talks about the sword of Damocles, which is the idea of there's a king in ancient Greece. I'm not sure where, who basically this story of the there's of not wanting to be a person who has a sword hanging over his head, held by a tail string hair, horse hair, right? Like, so it's just impending doom, right? Like, there's a you don't want to do a thing where it can all go to shit, and if it all goes to shit, it will take you with it, right? So you don't want that to happen. He talks about there's this bit I remember where he talks about like Indian women women in India who carry kind of goods on their heads to go to the market and back to sell goods. Like, they have really good spines, right? They're really good. And I saw this for myself when I was visiting India. There are old people who, I mean, you don't want to romanticize this too much, but it is true. You can observe that, because their diets have less sugar, their teeth are great, and their skin is great, and if they are old and they are kind of active, like, they just fit, and not like bulky, but they just they're kind of in a good physical condition to do what they need to do. And so it's Taylor talks about like the disease of comfort. And he says your body doesn't like having a job, it doesn't like paying taxes, it doesn't like chronic stressors, basically. So the point, which makes sense, is that your body likes kind of acute stress and then relaxation, which is like what it's like the hunt, right? Or if you're in danger and then you run away and then you're okay. But civilization has become such that it's kind of, you have chronic stresses, like, you have bills to pay every month, you have to show up to work every day, and it's this kind of numbing mundanity. And I remember this. I remember when I was rereading the book in 2015. I had been working for a couple of years, and I saw in myself, like, oh shit, that's me. Like, I have become addicted to my monthly paycheck. I think he calls it an opiate. Like, the greatest opiates or addictions are carbohydrates, heroin, and a monthly paycheck. And it's true, you just get used to it, you expect it to come, and you don't think so much about how you're earning each dollar. And there is some... So I'm not currently getting a paycheck, right? I'm currently fighting for... I have to go hunting for my dollars. And I actually think that's pretty great. It's especially if you're young, I guess. I don't know. It's it keeps me on my toes. It keeps me alert. I don't feel the kind of chronic malaise that I used to feel. I used to come home from work and on the commute and just want to drink a Coke because, I don't know, I need stimulation or something. And the Coke will make it worse because it's carbs, and it's just this difficult cycle of lethargy, right? And that's just that's me. That was me becoming more and more fragile, more and more dependent on that loop. And I'm pretty lucky that like nothing terrible happened. I mean, I'm dramatizing this a bit for the sake of talking about antifragile and fragility, but like, just super broadly, I think what I took away from Antifragile was just these ideas of seek out acute stresses and rest afterwards. And I have a bracket there for me, which was like, do stand-up comedy and travel, right? So doing stand-up comedy is pretty stressful, like in an acute way. Like, there's stakes when you feel like you're about to go on stage and there's like 100 people about to hang on to your every word. There's something high voltage about that. Like, it's exciting. And then it's a peak experience, and it's nice to have peak experiences for so many reasons, right? And I feel like I learn a lot from every one of those stand-up sets that I did. I remember thinking that you learn so much faster doing stand-up than you do playing live music. So I used to play live music, and sometimes you would play a whole song before you know whether or not the audience is liking it. And just with stand-up, people are hanging on your every word, and if your delivery is better or worse, people respond accordingly. And so yeah, stand-up is a great way to learn, right? And travel, episodic stress, long recovery times, fasting, right? So one of the concepts in Antifragile is via negativa, negativa, right? Which is basically by removing stuff, right? So very often when people want to improve their lives or they want to change things, they start by eliminating things. Sorry, they start by introducing something. Let's introduce a workout plan. Let's buy something, right? But what Taleb suggests is to remove things. So do less of something. And so fasting, I think it has become pretty fashionable these days. This idea of if you don't eat for most of the day once a week, like that has benefits, and it's good to feel hungry, right? Because if you eat at fixed meal times all the time, you never really feel hungry properly. One of my craziest experiences was I used to do this every Monday. I think 2 years ago, and a crazy thing that happened was, so I didn't eat anything all day. I just drank some green tea and water. And when I went to bed, I was so hungry when I went to bed. I was like, oh my god, I was like daydreaming about food. And then I fell asleep. And when I woke up the next morning, I wasn't hungry. And so, which was a mindfuck for me. So what that made me realize was that I actually it made me realize that hunger is psychosomatic. You know what I mean? It's like psychological. It's also, you feel it in your body, but it's rooted in your mind somehow. It's like cigarette addiction. So I smoke on and off, currently on, and you get cigarette cravings periodically, and it made me realize that hunger cravings are just like cigarette cravings. It's your it's not you need food right now. It's your brain/body thinks you need food right now, and it's giving you signals of you should probably eat right now. And you can experiment with this. And again, people aren't gonna, this is not medical advice. I'm not a doctor. I'm not telling you to not eat, consult, because things can go bad if you're not paying attention, right? And so the thing about danger play in general. So the thing that I do is I shave with a straight razor, which some people say they try and then they cut themselves, and then it's just terrible. But I find it very, very kind of meditative, because it's dangerous, right? And so you can cut yourself, and so you're forced to pay attention to your breathing. You're forced to pay attention to the contours of your skin. It just becomes this much more intimate meditative practice. And I think that's generally true same for not having a paycheck. So now every dollar becomes something that you have to mindfully chase after. And yeah, so this was about fasting, right? I am glad that I was introduced to these concepts. I don't think it's necessary to read the entire book of Antifragile. I think at this point there are lots and lots of blog posts written reviewing the books, and I think what you really want is you can even just find people who understand the principles and just hang out with them, even potentially. So one of the concepts in the book is lecturing birds how to fly, right? Which is what Taleb argues people do in school. And a quote that I like from somewhere else is that if we sent every child to walking school, within a couple of generations, people will no longer think you can learn how to walk without going to walking school, right? And so there's that idea there that people who are good at doing things by practicing, practitioners, they may not know why they are good at what they do, or they may not know how to articulate how and why they are good at what they do, because doing is a kind of knowledge in itself. It's a tactile, handsy knowledge, right? And there are people who are good at saying words, right? And so they can sound authoritative, they can sound like they know what they're talking about, and they can be charismatic, charming, whatever. And the idea is, don't fall into the trap of thinking that someone who lectures birds how to fly is the person responsible for birds flying. You know what I mean? So it's understanding the cause and effect relationships of things. And I think that's one way of approaching this whole thing, which is to try and really second guess yourself, ask yourself what the relationships are between things, try and disambiguate cause and effect, try and untangle what causes things, and so on. I think that's about it. I'm approaching 20 minutes now, which is probably way too long for a video, but I'm just going to publish it anyway. all in all, I think Antifragile was a good book. I'm glad I read it. It made an impression on me, and I would I would recommend reading a bunch of blog posts about it, I guess, because it is a very long book, and Taleb does have a style that can be a bit grating. I think like he doesn't try to. He almost makes a big deal out of not trying to please the reader. Like he's kind of got this whole intelligentsia, intellectual. I can roll with it. I'm fine. Like it's his book, and he can write however he wants to write, and I'm not interested in getting into an argument I'm not even interested in discussing in detail about like pros and cons of his style, or like consider the ideas, right? That's what really matters. And I think time has proven that these ideas are worth considering and engaging with. I do find that the books do reward rereads over periods of time. So I think I actually read it again about a third time, either early this year or maybe late last year. And I read like I was bouncing around at that point because I already have so many notes and stuff in the book, and I recognize what I'm reading, so it's kind of like an update or like a revisit of whatever's in the book. And I am what am I trying to say here? I no longer feel like I need to reread the whole book anymore. Like I can glimpse through it and find something that I'm like, oh yeah, that's kind of, so here's a random page. The domestication of emotions, and I've written for myself, control over suppression. Seen this way, Stoicism is about the domestication, not necessarily the elimination of emotions. It's transform fear into prudence, pain into information, desire into undertaking, invest in good actions. In my opinion, if previous Stoics claim to prefer poverty to wealth, we need to be suspicious of their attitude, as it may be all just talk. Right? Like, yeah, there's a vibe to this book and to Taleb's writing that, as per the Yiddish saying, if the student is smart, the teacher takes the credit. Like, just little ideas like that. Like, oh yeah, like if the student is smart, it makes sense. There's a lot of thoughtful phrases and ideas. So I don't see this as a book it's not a quick read. You don't have to read it all at once. You don't have to. It is dense, right? It is a thick ass book. If you without the conclusion, it's like 430 pages, right? So it does take a while to read. I do think you can get the idea of the book without reading the book. But read the book. It's a good book. It's a... Well, I would say this. I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. I would need to know what kind of person I'm talking to sense whether or not they would be into it. And I would recommend reading it, kind of casually. Like, it's not like you don't have to... But I guess I would say this for all books. Like, if you start reading it and you don't really like it, fuck it. Life's short. Don't spend time reading books that you don't enjoy. And borrow a copy from the library, maybe get an ebook, whatever. I'm just gonna end this here. Thanks for listening to me for 20 something minutes. I hope that my future book reviews will be less lengthy and more concise, and I will catch you guys next time.